Hey, welcome to another video. So I don't know if you've ever been through a period in your life where, things that used to make sense to you just all of a sudden didn't. Maybe you wake up feeling disconnected from the world around you. You start to question things like your relationships, your, work environment, or just work in general, and your identity even. Things like who you've been being and maybe even questioning who you are. So if people look at your life from the outside, they would think that everything is fine, everything is normal. But inside of yourself, something is collapsing. Your internal world is starting to break apart and you don't know what to do. So if you're going through that, you're probably going through a dark night of the soul. I have been through many dark nights in my life, but the most painful, challenging, and longest one I've been through was for over 10 years. And it basically was from like my mid-20s to my mid-30s. And at the time, there was nothing on YouTube to kind of help me navigate through this period in my life. And so I just wanted to share, what the dark night is and why it happens, just so you know what to expect so that you don't go in blind like I did and make the same mistake I did. So the dark night of the soul is also called oftentimes an ego death. This is basically a transitional period where things within you, like the frameworks, your program structures within you, are breaking apart, and you're kind of going through this transition phase of kind of letting a new person, a new version of yourself come up. Although, it's not always something that you see on the surface, like people outside in your life may not realize what's going on with you, but this is all going on internally. Some of the examples of how it can show up in your life is maybe you've been chasing success and you've been finding it unfulfilling. Maybe a relationship ended and you lost your sense of self from it. Or maybe one day you wake up and you realize, that everything you've been doing was a performance and that you were just sick and tired of it. So during this dark night, your old self starts to dissolve and your new self is not yet there. So you're kind of like in this in-between phase. And this in-between phase can also be called the spiritual void, or the void for short. When I was in my mid-20s, I went to a silent meditation retreat. And after that, it was a life-changing experience. But after that, I basically had a significant ego death. But out of that came the spiritual void. I was in the spiritual void for around 6 years. And I came to this deep realization that, who I was being up until that point was completely, a fake person, was like a mask that I had been wearing. It was basically a persona I put on to basically keep myself safe and to not let people see the real me. But because I've been doing it for so long in my life, I didn't know who the real me was. And so even though I was in the spiritual void, I was still functional, so I was still able to work and still able to do kind of like the normal things in life. But it was just a very, strange feeling. It was a really confusing time. Everything basically started to lose its meaning. Everything felt empty. There was kind of like this dreadfulness about existing. And, having realized that my mask, or that I had been wearing a mask my whole life, that it just felt so vulnerable. Like I was so exposed to this realization that I was so afraid to kind of go into this journey, right? I was afraid to be in this space of the unfamiliar and to not really know who I really am, but knowing that who I had been in the past was completely my false self, that I just didn't know how to be anymore. And so the mistake that I had made at the time was to resist the stage. I really tried my best to avoid it by, maintaining my old life. I still tried to socialize, as much as I could, and just kind of maintain the same friendships and just put on my fake persona, I guess you could say, and try to just live life as usual. But I realized, over time that you really can't run away from it because the pain and discomfort will eventually catch up with you. And so, going through that experience and kind of realizing that, I do question, if I didn't do that, any of that avoiding, if I didn't avoid it or resist it, would it have taken as long as it did? Would it have lasted 6 years, you know? And so if you can, you know, learn from my mistakes, don't resist this phase. Try to find as much acceptance to it as possible, and try to kind of accept the journey for where you are at, and try to be also compassionate with yourself about it. I was really hard on myself, thinking that, you know, I was not enough, I wasn't doing things right, and so I just made it more painful for myself. And so when you build an identity based on survival, you know, to basically find acceptance, to feel loved and to feel safe, that's not really a good foundation to kind of build your identity on. You know, maybe you were the caretaker, you were the responsible one, the people pleaser, the achiever, the perfectionist. I, in my life, had to be a people pleaser because I felt like I needed external validation. I had this big fear of rejection, and so what people thought of me really mattered. And so I thought I had to be this outgoing, happy, fun person and everything, but really it was just a mask for all of the kind of dark feelings I had repressed within myself. So I guess the dark night of the soul happens because your inner voice starts to speak to you. You know, it starts to say things like, this isn't working, this isn't the way that we are supposed to go. You know, you can't keep abandoning yourself. And so it kind of makes me think of when you build a home on an unstable foundation. Like, it's going to be very vulnerable to the external weather, you know, wind, storms, whatever. And that's kind of the same thing as building an identity in your life around this idea of feeling safe, of being loved and accepted by other people. And so it's like your soul is trying to tell you, like, to wake up, you know, to kind of just start living from like a place of authenticity. And when you build a home on a solid foundation, it won't be vulnerable to the weather, it won't be vulnerable to storms. And so it's that kind of, you know, phase of change where your soul is trying to wake you up and trying to get you to start building your life, building yourself, your identity as who you really are, instead of as this fake persona, this false self, basically the ego. And so if you continue to ignore that inner voice of yours, you know, eventually the universe will slap you a lot harder. It might be, you know, an event that happens that really brings you down to like rock bottom. For me, I didn't listen to myself, and so it took a dysfunctional and unhealthy relationship to start waking me up. So even though this can be a challenging time, at least you kind of know what to expect now. You know, I would really advise not to resist this phase and try to avoid it. Basically, you have to walk through the fire. Like, there's no way around it, because eventually it will catch up with you. But don't resist it. Try to accept it for, you know, the experience as best as you can. Even if it's really challenging and you are having a hard time accepting it, you can say that to yourself. You can say that you accept that you cannot accept this moment. You know, that's even one step closer than what I did. And it's really good to also just have a lot of self-compassion as you go through this journey, because I don't know if you're like me, but I was like, I'm just really hard on myself in general. And so going through this phase, going in blind and not knowing like that I was even in a dark night of the soul at the time, like I was really hard on myself, and I thought that I was doing something wrong. I thought I was fucking up my life. Like, I didn't know what was going on. So just try to have a lot of self-compassion during this phase, because you're already going through so much, and to be that critical of yourself is not really helpful. So I guess that is it for today. You know, I know this is a really challenging experience, and just know though that when you go through this challenge, when you end up on the other side, it'll be completely worth it, and it'll change your life for the better. So just hang in there. So thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time.